Welcome to Entrepreneurs Unleashed. The theme for this one is called the startup process. And actually we're doing this one slightly different from other Entrepreneurs Unleashed. Usually we do a sort of a Q&A style session, but this one is, we're going to have 3 speakers that are going to talk about different components of going through the startup process and just seeing some of the people in the community and where they're at and what they need to be focusing on. This seemed really applicable, this event seemed applicable to do. So it's called the startup process. So I'll start by talking a little bit about the process. Then we'll have Thompson, who was one of the co-founders of TradeGecko, which is a really successful startup that came out of Singapore. He's done a few other exciting things as well. Another startup called Army, a digital marketing agency called Momentum. And actually the story behind his most recent venture, Contento, was another sort of inspiration for this event. So he's going to talk a little bit about the process that you go through to find the right idea and then validate it based on his experience growing companies, mentoring founders, and also what he's doing with Contento now. Then we'll have Greig Cranfield, who will kindly talk about the process that TradeMe go through to develop new products. So he uses user experience at TradeMe to validate ideas and choose what products they develop. So he'll be talking about that process. And then towards the end, I'll talk a bit about business models. So it'd be really good actually just to get an idea of what stage everyone is at, so we can make sure that you get the most out of the session. So hands up if you're at the stage where you have an idea or entrepreneurial ambitions, but you haven't really started yet. Okay, cool. Hands up if you've launched the company, but you're still sort of trying to figure out what you're creating and you're in that stage of trying to build the product, that sort of stage. You've got the idea, you've kind of at launch and you're trying to piece together all the variables. Yeah, that's you. Cool. And then what about anyone that's in the growth stage? So you built your product, now you're working out what your business model is and focusing on growth. I know there are a few people here at that stage. Ellen? Cool. Okay, so I'm going to kick off by talking about the first stage of developing an idea, which is sort of what I like to call finding your playground, but I'll explain why soon. So, starting a business is incredibly fulfilling, but it's also really hard. And it's especially hard if you're trying to build something that no one's built before, or solve a problem in a new, exciting way, or develop some technology that's quite unique. So the bigger problems you're trying to solve, the harder it becomes. And so what we try to do at Entrepreneurs Unleashed is talk about these hard things so that everyone knows that it's something that everyone experiences, so you sort of don't feel isolated when you go through them. There's this great quote which is very bleak, but it's by Elon Musk, and he says, actually he quotes his friend in saying that starting a company is like eating glass and staring into the abyss. You have to do a lot of things you don't like. I wouldn't go as far as saying that, but he's solving huge significant problems and a number of them at the same time, and it is really, really hard. And you definitely go through ups and downs along the way. So the reason I wanted to tell you a little bit about why we find it so hard, just because I'm not sure what stage you're at, but I thought that would be useful. But it feels hard because when you're growing a company, you're constantly failing in a way, or you're constantly facing rejection. So, and your brain, or rejection, feels like the stress that you feel from rejection and failure is similar to, it's kind of the way your brain operates. It's like stress that's sort of related to the concept of death. And so this is kind of evolved from hundreds of thousands of years ago, where if you did a new thing or put yourself out there, you risk being eaten by a saber-toothed tiger or something along those lines. And so that was like the risk of real death. And now we have the same brain function, and so it associates doing new things, like putting your idea out there, doing sales, pitching for money, with the same stress response as though you're going to an unknown situation. So it's sort of optimizing for survival. So when you're growing a business, you're having to do that constantly, and it feels really hard and highly stressful. It's also hard because school doesn't teach you how to do it. In fact, it's the opposite. So school was designed in the industrial era to create employees and consumers. And so you go through a process where you're assigned a value, you're told what you're good at, you're told what you're not good at, and that sort of sets your path for where you go. Entrepreneurship is completely not like that. You've got to figure out your own value, and you've got to create your own value. So you're having to develop a whole lot of new skills and sort of redefine yourself to get there. And thirdly, you're trying to create something that's completely new in the world and make people care enough about it that they're going to buy your product. And on the surface, standing on the outside and looking at businesses, that seems like it just happens, but it's really, really hard because it's a really noisy world and there's a significant amount of things that you have to get right to get to the point where you've got a successful business. So that's why it's hard, but it is so worth it if you do it in the right way. The lifestyle or the way of existing that entrepreneurship enables is hugely valuable. Being in control of your own value and what you do in life is something that most entrepreneurs, I'm sure, would say that they wouldn't replace for the world. But the process can become significantly easier if you do it in the right way. So people have paved the path for creating new companies, and it's becoming significantly easier with more and more people talking about how you build businesses. And there's tons of resources available on the internet and programs and various things like that, which make it easier. So that's kind of what we're going to try and talk. That's sort of a long-winded way of setting the scene for why the process is so important, because it helps you to reduce risk and reduces the ups and downs in a significant way. So the process. This is sort of, there's a number of different views on the process for building a company. This is the one that we teach at Mum's Garage and I like. And the first stage is exploration, and we talk about it being problem founder fit. So that's helping an individual figure out what problem they want to solve. And often this part is skimmed over because people think that great companies come from great ideas. But really, I haven't seen a single person who has ended up with creating the idea that they started out with initially. It's generally that they find an area that they really care about and start identifying problems in that space. And so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that stage because I think it's fundamental to get that right for building a really good company. The second stage is sort of the startup stage. And again, there's a number of definitions around what a startup is. I sort of like to think of it, and other people think of it as sort of a startup is, you're a startup if you haven't really figured out really what value you're creating yet, and you're still in the process of piecing together the components that enable you to have a business model that make you function like a business. So that's problem market fit, which is finding the problem that people actually want. So figuring out what your problem is and who has it the most. And then once you've got that, it's developing a product that fits with what the market want as well. So Carl will sort of talk about the transition from exploration into startup, and then Greig will talk about the product side and validation as well. And then I'll touch briefly on growth as well, because I think it's really important thinking about, well, when you get to that stage, the business model stage is really important as well, because I feel like that's where it starts to get really hard. But that's also because I love creating new things, and when you get to the growth stage, you kind of got to stop creating new things and just keep doing the thing that you do well. So stage one, exploration. So as I mentioned earlier, I like to think of this as finding your playground. So that's finding the area where you want to start creating things in, because you can really create, there's a ton of things that you can create, but if you can find the area that really brings you alive, the chances of creating a successful company, I believe, is definitely higher. And this doesn't have to be like an industry. It can be an industry, or it can be something like, if you love solving complex problems in building technology, that's sort of a playground, or it's just the area, the things in the world that really fascinate you, the things that you're drawn to. That's a really great place to start spending time in to identify problems. Has anyone read the book Good to Great by Jim Collins? It's a really good book, especially if you're going into growing as a company. But the book actually talks about organizations and how they studied a number of organizations that went from just being good companies to being extraordinary companies. So they were the best in the world at what they did, and they found there were a number of concepts that emerged from this. And the really interesting thing about business is that the evolution of a business when it gets to the company stage is kind of like a macro version of the evolution of a person. And I guess because a company is like someone that begins at the beginning of the journey, it's just a founder or a team of people, and then after a period of time, it's a large company. And so a lot of the concepts that apply to a company apply at a really small level to the individual. So this is at the company level. To create a great company, there's sort of three things that he identified as being really important. The first one is what you can be the best in the world. You can go whatever way you want, but what you can be the best in the world at. So finding the area or the space where you're the best in the world at. The second one is what drives your economic engine. So that's, as a business, you're finding a business model that makes you money. And the third thing is the thing that you and your team are deeply passionate about. So that's at a company level, and so this is our version, which is not quite as good, but you can apply this at an individual level as well. And so this is what I think is really useful if you're trying to find the area that you want to start a business in, is applying these, thinking about what these three things are for you. And I'm going to talk about them quickly in isolation, but really they work together. So the only difference really here is that, so you've got what you're deeply passionate about, you've got what you're great at, and the third thing is, instead of a viable business, it's things that people will pay for. And people are significantly more likely to pay for things that solve real problems than they are things that just enhance their life slightly. It's your brain functions that way. And so I guess just a bit about my story is, so Mum's Garage is my company, and I have always had ideas, loads of ideas, and relatively good ones as well. And I really struggled to get to the stage where I was executing on them. And so the big difference for me was figuring out, like taking the time to figure out what these three things were for me. And because when you figure them out, it makes you significantly better executing. So I'm going to touch on each of them really quickly. Just give me a second. Yeah. So the first one is do something that you're passionate about. And there are a number of reasons why this is important, but the first is because it gives you more energy. And I think this quote by Ken Robinson sums it up really well. If you do the things that you love to do, it actually feeds your energy. At the end of the day, if you're doing something that you love to do, you can be physically worn out but elated. If you're doing something you love, an hour can feel like 5 minutes. If you're doing something you don't care about, 5 minutes can feel like an hour. And these different things that feed our energy are different for all of us. So if you're looking for, you're in the early stages, start thinking about what those things are where you sort of just lose track of time. And they talk about it as flow, but those are the things that energize you. The second reason why it's important to do something that you're really passionate about is that you'll be more persistent. So building a business takes a long time, at least 2 years, at least. I can be proven wrong, I'm sure, but for first-time entrepreneurs, I'd say at least 2 years. And the thing is, you really only see companies after they've been around for a number of years. So people think that you have these startup successes that happen overnight, but if you look into their story, there's generally a significant period of them trying to make things work, and it's usually longer than 2 years. So you need persistence to keep going through those times. And again, there's a really good quote from Steve Jobs. And once you sort of start to understand these concepts about what makes successful entrepreneurs, you'll start to notice, maybe it's conscious bias as well, but you'll start to notice these quotes from successful entrepreneurs that really validate these concepts. So his quote is, "I'm convinced that about half of what separates the successful entrepreneurs from the non-successful ones is pure perseverance. Unless you have a lot of passion about this, you're not going to survive. You're going to give it up. So you've got to have an idea or a problem or a wrong that you want to right that you're passionate about. Otherwise, you're not going to have the perseverance to stick it through." And that is hands down, I would say, I completely agree with that, having seen a number of companies or a number of founders come through with Mum's Garage and seeing the people that drop off and the ones that just keep on going. The passion side and doing something that really aligns with your personal purpose is really important. So the second circle is figure out what you're great at. And this actually tends to be really hard for people, especially Kiwis, I've found. Like often if I do workshops, we'll do this and I'll ask someone to say what they're great at and no one will say anything. So it takes a bit of time to figure out what you're good at because for most people, you're constantly focusing on what you're not good at and what you should improve on. But the reason why it's important to start with what you're already good at is because when you're starting a business, you're wanting to get to the point where you're making money generally as fast as possible because, you need to make money to survive. That's just the reality of business. And so it takes far less time and energy to become great at something you're already good at than it does to become good at something that you're mediocre at. So it pays to play to your strengths. And on top of that, when you know what you're good at, you know who you need to team up with or employ as well. So start thinking about what you're good at. And it doesn't necessarily mean the hard skills because you've all got to learn a lot of hard skills when you're growing a business because, as I said earlier, most people aren't taught how to start a business. It's the soft skills like good at solving problems or good at technical problems or good at bringing people together. So maybe you could create a community or something like that. And then the third problem, which is really, really important, and I'm sure both Carl and Greig will probably touch on it, is finding real problems that you care about solving. So that's generally one of the biggest reasons companies don't work, is that when you come up with an idea, you kind of totally exaggerate what it is that you were trying to create in the first place. So often ideas will come from problems that people have, but when you start thinking about it as a business, it gets layers and layers of complexities and features and various things that mean that it shifts to a solution that you have dreamed up and it is this amazing technical thing. But really, you've kind of shifted away from what the fundamental problem is. So it's important that you find fundamental truths, and that's really what the process of validation is about as well. So the point of that, or the main message for those of you that are in the early stages and trying to create something, you can learn to be, like entrepreneurship, you can learn to be an entrepreneur. Everyone learns how to be an entrepreneur. Anyone who's successful has learned it. But you just got to keep going long enough to get to the point where you've got the things right to make a business work. So find the thing that you care about enough so that you're forced to do the things necessary to make it a reality. That's my advice for the first point. And a really great example of this process is Carl and his process with Contento so far. So with that, I will hand over to Carl to talk about what he's done in his story and where he's at with Contento. Cool. Contento. I always say Contento.
Yeah.
Do you want
We
that?
got mine.
I do indeed.
Cool. Cool. So it seems like everyone's quite very early stage, trying to work out what they want to do. If they've got an idea, they're trying to validate or whatnot, which is really cool to see. So yeah, thank you, Nat. I wholeheartedly agree with everything Nat said, basically. So she knows her stuff. So I'm going to talk to you about, once you've got some sort of concept or trying to work out what idea you want to do, what problem you want to solve, how to go about actually validating that. And so a little bit about me, just to put things into perspective. I moved to Singapore a few years ago let's get back a little bit. I started a clothing label a while ago. I've run a few businesses, New Zealand small businesses, that sort of thing, and then moved to Singapore and started TradeGecko. We ran through a 100-day boot camp in Singapore and came out the other end and that was basically just a lot of customer validation. We completely pivoted twice. When I mean pivot, I mean the whole business completely changed. What with the solution, everything, we changed completely twice within that 100 days. And that was just from talking to customers and working out, hey, this what we thought was really awesome isn't actually going to work. What we got to in the end of the 100 days was a inventory and order management system for wholesale style businesses. TradeGecko is now over 100 staff with in offices in Singapore, Toronto, and the Philippines. Services over 15,000 businesses and it's valued at about 90 million at the moment. So I was there for a couple of years setting that up, at the end of the 100 days, so we finished this boot camp, we've done all our validation and so forth. We had customers, potential customers, gagging for a product like this that we were talking about. So we stood in front of a room full of investors and pitched this, just literally a story and some screenshots, because what we could build in that time wasn't even close to being showable. And so we had got $1 million funding, and then obviously we started working through the customer discovery phase a little bit more and got to MVP about 6 to 8 months later. Bronami is another one that I've started with a friend. It doesn't tick all my boxes in terms of what I look for in a startup, but it was something I wanted to do anyway. Probably not the best reason. Coffee Festival was something I started in New Zealand as well with some friends, and I also mentor at the Ice House at the Flux Incubator. Do you guys know they're actually doing intakes at the moment for the next Flux? So anyone along, they particularly look for people with a bit of traction, a few customers, a bit of a product, and they kind of pull them through their 100-day accelerated program. So I've been doing that. I've been also spent the first couple of days last week with, I got pulled into foodstuffs. They did like a hackathon with 100 of their staff, which was quite cool. My team won, of course. So there's a lot of ideas out there, right? There's a lot of really dumb ideas out there. And I've seen a lot of startups come up with some really cool ideas, but they've failed to do the validation to work out if anyone would actually want or pay for it. There's Steve Blanks actually is the one who came up with this concept. He started to realize that there's a significant difference with what was happening in Silicon Valley with startups or these young sort of agile businesses compared to what was happening in the corporate world. And he's created, or a while ago now, created a framework which is now the Bible for this whole thing. I'll get into that soon. But so what I'm talking about now is finding the right fit for you. So Natalie was, hitting on those points before about finding your playground. I see it as like it's taking what you already have, your experience, your passion, what you're good at, all this sort of stuff, and then matching it to where you want to go. So like, what are your life goals? What do you want your life to look like? Because the different companies, different startups are going to take you in different directions. So I think it's really important to work out where you're trying to get to as well, and try and match up what that company could look like to where you're going. There's actually, I'll try and get my notes out for this one. Sorry. So it's really defining what success looks like for you. I think that's really important. And it's about passion. And we keep saying that. It's like, what are you passionate about? And it's actually a really hard one for me. What I'm passionate about is taking convoluted, complicated processes and turning them into something simple and beautiful. And I think that's kind of where I'm at the moment with my passion. I love designing stuff. I love designing stuff that doesn't quite exist in the way I think it should exist. And at the end of the day, that helps people and makes money and all the rest of it. For me, I like B2B. I like software. I like monthly recurring revenue. All these things are part of my tick boxes. And also, is it the biggest thing I could possibly do? Is this opportunity just New Zealand? Is this global? Is this one particular industry? How does it fit with many industries? All these things are kind of like, I want to do the biggest thing possible. I've only got X amount of time, X amount of effort. I want something big. That's just me. That's my success. What success means to you could be completely different. So you've got to work out what space, what industry you want to play in as well, because some industries are fucking boring. So we initially looked at doing a sales app for sales reps, which worked on top of like NetSuite and stuff like this. They're awful. They're not the people we want to deal with. And so this is all part of working out, like, is this actually the industry you want to work in? Passion and perseverance that Natalie was talking about before. This is really what it comes down to with your entire team. And what I see in successful startups is that if you're passionate about something and you persevere, you're gonna make it work. You iterate and you're agile enough to work out those problems and get into the nitty-gritty and work it out. I've seen a lot of businesses and startups fail because they're just not that passionate about it. So this is typically what's happening with most startups. or I mean, people come into this, they have this like aha moment. They're like, oh my God, I've got this idea for an app. It's going to be amazing. And then they go, okay, let's build out an MVP and and then lots of people will use it and it's going to be amazing. Because it's what I want. Obviously, if it's what I want, everyone else is going to want, right? It's just not how it works. Well, I've seen this like over and over again. I've got friends who have come up with an idea, spent $2 million of their own money building a solution that I don't know where they're at with this, but they're doing something else. Why would you spend all this money, time and resource in building something that you don't know people want until afterwards, when there's now a new system, a new process, a new way of being able to validate a lot of your assumptions before spending all the money and time and effort in doing it? So this is the Steve Blank's model. It can get quite complicated, so I'm just going to, I've got my own thing going on, I'll show you soon. But essentially it comes down to customer discovery, customer validation. This is your early stage. This is what we're focusing on. And ignore pivot. I think pivot's a shit word. It's iterate, refine. Pivot is like you're changing everything. So you really want to find a problem that people care about, that they are willing to pay money for, that creates value for them. You've got some sort of idea of how this could be solved, but you should, at this stage, what you're trying to do is just validate the concept, validate that there is actually a problem out there. And then propose funnels. So this is kind of like your sales channel. And the marketing and sales at this stage is like, don't even worry about that. Like, there's many different ways of marketing any sort of idea. So customer validation, it goes into product market fit, working out if this is actually there or not, if the product you're thinking of is going to fit the market, etc. The business model, if that's working, sales and marketing roadmap, it's all pretty straightforward stuff. So initially, so this is what I do. Initial validation. So if you've got an idea, everything you have is just assumptions. Like nothing, you cannot believe that what you know is real. The only people that can, like, data always wins. So it's talking to your customers and stuff that's actually going to give you the insights to prove to yourself that you're right or wrong. So the assumption is that there's a problem that exists. People are looking for a solution for this. Because if they're not looking for a solution, then how the fuck are you going to get them? They are willing to pay for it. Obviously, you need something that's got enough value that people are actually willing to pay for this, otherwise what's the point? You've got some sort of idea of an MVP. Is it an app? Is it a web app? Is it a book? Is it, what is it? And then, so you've written down all these assumptions. Then you can go over and start doing some research. And the biggest thing, and this is the thing that people fall over on straight away, is customer interviews. And like Natalie was talking about before, people don't like rejection, so we just avoid it. We don't like being wrong. We don't like people throwing something in our face. We're scared of rejection, and people don't do the customer interviews. I see it over and over and over again. I've done all sorts of startup weekends and hackathons and bits and pieces, and the one thing that gets me is just, and you see it from good teams that pitch and bad teams. The good teams are the ones that actually went out and spoke to their customers. I've seen startups go through thousands and thousands of dollars and fail, after just pushing this ball forward without ever actually going out and talking to their customers. They don't understand what the market wants. You can't build something for that. Like, everything you have is just assumptions. You have to go and talk to the market. Market research and data. So there's heaps of stuff out there, research papers and data out there that's going to give you insights into those specific markets and things that you're looking at. Keyword research is another really good one. So you can very quickly use Google AdWords or Keyword Planner, or Mangles is a really good one, and do some keyword research about how people are searching for this particular solution, or how they're looking up this problem or around it. So starting to get used to the jargon and the terms that they're using as well. They're probably going to be your early adopters. Your competitor analysis as well. So doing a good competitor analysis and working out how people, and a lot of this is actually going to come from your customer interviews, is talking to your customers about like, okay, you looked for a solution, what are you doing at the moment? How are you solving this problem at the moment? Then go on and start doing some competitor analysis. Another really good tool for there is SimilarWeb. So SimilarWeb is a tool, free tool that you can go, well, paid and free, but you can go on there and you put in a competitor and it can give you full demographic of who's hitting their website. Age, location, hobbies, parents or not, it's fucking scary. So there's a heap of, as long as they've got enough traffic, heaps of cool competitor analysis you can do. Research, reviews and comments. So another really cool one I like to do that most people don't really think about is go on to Amazon, look up the books within the industry and start reading the reviews. People will tell you what they like, what they don't like, what they're looking for, what they're not. Same with Shopify. If you're, TradeGecko is a partner of Shopify. We're on the Shopify App Store and there's a whole bunch of reviews up there. Same with all our competitors. So go on there, read them all. This is like feedback from actual customers. So really good insights into, what they're looking for, what they like about a system, what they don't like about a system. And then refine. So the way I work is I basically have everything in one document. So you heard of lean canvas, right? Heard of lean canvas? So basically I don't do the one page, I just put everything into like one document, slide by slide. It doesn't matter if it's got like one sentence on the slide, it's still there, it's still part of this master document. So write all your assumptions down, go through that like lean canvas process, then do the research and just go back and refine. Once you've got that first initial side out of the way, now so far you've spent no money. There's no product being programmed or developed. There's none of that. There's nothing that you've actually paid for. Now you can start doing things like surveys, paid ads, landing pages, and articles. So you get a little bit more quantitative data with things like this. It's the customer interviews that are probably the most important thing to take away. Like you have to get out there and start talking to people. There's a process to that. You want to talk to them in non-leading ways, ask them questions the right way, etc. I would suggest going and looking up that and learning a little bit more about that. So arrogance is your enemy. We had a saying at TradeGecko, know you know nothing, and data always wins. So you have to test everything. You have to prove yourself right or wrong. Just from your own experience, if you know something to be true or not, I would still test it. Still go out and talk to people, get the qualitative or quantitative data to make sure that you are on the right track. And put together a good squad. Even if they don't know that they're actually on your squad, you've got people that you can go and talk to. And it's amazing how many people will actually talk to you about this sort of stuff. Most mentors, most startup people who have done it that you see out at some of the events and stuff like that, I'm pretty sure like 90% hit rate. If you just ask them to have a coffee, they'll be like, yeah, sure, I'd love to help. I don't know many people that wouldn't. So if there's anyone that's a leader in the industry that you think, man, I'd love to get the insights out of them, ask them. The only thing that, it's either going to be no or yes, and most times it's going to be yes, and you're going to get some fucking awesome data out of it. So put together a good squad, even if they don't know they're on your squad. Use them. So I'll brush over TradeGecko quickly. Am I on time, Nat?
Yeah, you're doing fine.
What we did at Trade Gecko is we went in with a completely different product into the boot camp, and the whole idea of this boot camp is to validate what you're doing is going to work. There's no point coming, there was a lot of teams within that boot camp that just built a product, and they came out with a product, and they had something tangible, and they felt good, but no one used it. So we were quite the opposite. We went through the whole boot camp just validating the idea. I was up at 2 a.m. calling New York companies, just cold calling people and talking to them about their inventory problems and how they're solving their inventory problems and what their biggest pain points are and all this sort of stuff. And at the end of it, you tell them what you're doing. Now, after you get to I always say actually 32. So there's some weird, it's called the jelly bean rule. So if you take a jar of jelly beans, slight tangent, if you take a jar of jelly beans and you ask 32 people how many jelly beans are in the jar, the average of that is exactly how many jelly beans are in it. So if you go and ask, my theory is, if you go and ask 32 people what their pains are and so forth, you're gonna be on the right track. So that's what we did at Trade Gecko. We were literally going out and calling New York companies, Australian companies, Singapore companies. We were walking around Singapore talking to people and stuff. We very quickly found that Singapore was not our market. At the time, SaaS was very, very new to them, and we would very much struggle. Australia, New Zealand, and the US were our main targets after doing some customer validation. And we had a big list of people that we'd talked to that were like, oh my God, take my money, I want this now. We had a few people actually. One of the biggest manufacturers basically the manufacturer of sunglasses based out of Hong Kong wanted to give us funding and build it with them. And we were like, I just can't do it for biased to one customer. So what else? So that talking to the industry is incredibly, incredibly important. So Contento is my new sort of venture I'm following. After Trade Gecko, I spent a couple of years basically just fucking around, did a lot of traveling. I started Momentum, which was a marketing company, a digital marketing company. We worked on a lot of startups, a lot of early stage companies, and we went through a lot of, actually every company I brought on, if they'd been around for 10 years or not, we'd strip it all back and redo the customer development. We'd go out and talk to their customers and we'd redefine that business and create a strategy based on what their customers are actually asking for, because it's surprising how many businesses don't actually know their customers that well. So we actually went through this program, process over and over with a lot of the customers that we're doing in Momentum. Momentum got to a point where I didn't want to do it anymore. I never wanted to be an agency. I wanted to work on cool projects with good people, and I take on everything, and it just burnt me. And I realized that I'm not actually doing what I'm passionate about. I'm not actually working on something for me. I needed to be focused and work out what's actually essential. So actually a really, really great book that helped me was Essentialism, the Disciplined Pursuit of Less. So it's very much about working out what's actually essential, what your goals are. And when I heard, working towards your goal, I was like, wow, that's interesting, because I don't actually have any goals. So I very quickly had to think, okay, well, what do I actually want? What am I trying to get to? So I worked that out, and I stripped out a lot. I stripped out my clients, I got rid of my staff, I stripped out all the projects and people that weren't helping me to get towards my goal. Then I moved back to Contento was actually an idea I had when I was doing Momentum, and I started very lightly brushing the surface of filling out this master doc of what I think the problem is and some of my assumptions. So I kind of pulled that back up and I was like, I think there's something here. So I pulled it up and I decided that I would continue validating this concept. So I spent the last couple of months, I'm taking my time on it, talking to businesses. So I've gone out and I've talked to about 30 different businesses now, brands as well as publishers. And I'm looking at creating essentially a platform which connects brands to media or publishers. So my experience, my background is in, started off in web design, but more digital marketing and SEO. So I understand that. And I also understand the publishing side of things. My father is a publisher, my partner's a publisher. So I understand media, I understand how the advertising model works for online publications and stuff like that. And so what I've been doing is I believe that there's a problem with guest blogging, if you will. I'm still trying to work out how to elevator pitch this, but essentially backlinks are one of the best things for SEO. And every business out there also wants to have their brand or their story heard. The problem is, and I've talked to like content people as well, they create content and they put it on their blog. Now we all know about content marketing. All of you should know like the importance of content marketing, and it's become massive recently. Over the last few years, content marketing is just, I mean, the results you get are awesome. It's just harder to do and so forth. But most people, they create content, they put it on their website, they post it on Facebook. That's about as far as it goes. Having to try and work, and I've done this with a number of companies, try and work with partners on getting content on their website is really, really difficult. So what we're trying to do with this is basically create a platform in which you create content, an article, a video. We suggest a bunch of media or partners that you could push it out to. It goes out to them and they choose to accept it or not, or put a price on it. So that's kind of what I think is, what I think the problem is, what I think the solution is. So I've been out and I've talked to a whole bunch of people, and what's happened is that I've actually stumbled across something quite significant. So 5 years ago, the publishers, digital publishers, media used to be able to get what it is now for CPM, so it's a click per thousand, like for a banner, impressions, cost per 1,000 impressions is now 10% of what it was 5 years ago. So what that means is that these online media, these online magazines, the press releases and stuff that they get sent are now not worth anything because they can't even afford to pay someone to turn it into content, because the cost they get back on the impressions from the ads is fucking nothing. So they're all dying, they're literally, and they're gagging for something like this to be able to just give them good content. So I'm still validating this, I'm still going through the process, but what I'm finding is some really interesting stuff, and I'm finding what ends up happening is once you've talked to enough people, you start seeing the same things come up, same words, the same terminology, and you see patterns emerging, and that's what you really want to find. If you've got an idea, you want to go out and talk to as many people as possible, and you want to understand the industry completely and understand the pains and understand the terminology and the solutions and where the value really lies. So that's kind of what I've been doing at the moment. It's been super awesome. And now I'm kind of at a point where I've validated the idea. I know that this is a problem. I know that people are willing to pay for it. I know how to reach them. I know there's a business model behind it somewhere. I'm not focused on worrying about the product. I'm not worried about writing any code right now. I'm just trying to validate that this is actually a thing.
Oh, excuse me, mate. Are you part of the JT Fox crew? JT Fox, you know, the world, he's the millionaire wolf man, property manager,
No.
#1 in the world. Oh, you should join him.
Join them.
Join him. Part of the network.
Cool. Yeah, so I guess, did I cover everything?
Yeah, that was perfect. Cool. Maybe we'll say, actually, are there a couple of, maybe any questions? Probably have time for just one or two, or we can leave it till the end. Oh, we've got ding ding.
Thank you. So I have a question. Like, how do you pick your co-founders, and do you have any?
How do you pick your co-founders? Good question. So, and something I've learned along the way as well is pick the people you want to have a beer with.
Have a beer?
Yeah. Even when you're hiring, it's less about experience and more about street smart, passion, and it's culture. It's about culture. You want to. You need the right people on your team, and especially when you're small, you can't afford to have someone that's not on the same level as you, right? It is really difficult, and yeah, I guess that's what vesting is for. Yeah, so you don't get all your shares at once. Yeah, there's a cliff, and it's vesting per month. So anyway, that's complicated, but yeah. Basically, if you get someone on, and let's say they're getting 20% of the company, you have a 1-year cliff, which means they have to stay in there for 1 year before getting anything. And anything after that, they get a small amount per month for like 4 years. And if they fall off, they get it per month as of day 1, but they don't get anything until the 12 months. Does that make sense? It gets complicated, but yeah, vesting, they don't get all their shares at once.
Cool.
Less risk.
There's another question here?
Yeah, so I just want to revisit the company in Hong Kong that offered you some early
Yeah.
stage funding. Why did you decide not to partner with them? They seem like they would give you a great leg up, and what works for
Yeah,
you?
and I mean, we had no idea if we'd get funding afterwards or not, but we knew that if we went with one partner, that it would be led down the way that they want and not necessarily down the right path. Make sense? Like, they have their own specific needs and problems, and they would want it their way, and that's not what we were trying to do.
Cool. Big thank you. Round of applause, Carl. Cool. Okay. What I really love about this is that Carl is a really experienced founder, and it's still the same process. Like, for a new idea, you still go through the same process that we've talked about today. The same as if you were just starting out. Just you can do it slightly faster because you've done it before, but you still have to validate your idea. So we'll take a quick 5-minute break so you can grab some more food, top up your drink, and then we'll come back and Greig will be up next.
Thanks for coming. It's the first time I've been to the Mum's Garage events as well, so it's been awesome so far. Completely agree with everything Nat and Carl have said. And so I'm going to try and have a little bit more content in there around getting to product and getting to MVP, but similar kind of concept to what both have touched on as well. So there'll be some stuff in there that kind of repeats, but hopefully that just kind of drums it home a bit more. So yeah, I work at TradeMe. I'm a UX researcher before that, or actually still now I run a startup grind in Auckland and across New Zealand. So we're kind of similar to network for entrepreneurs. Before that, I was at a company called Quiver Vision, and we were augmented reality children's apps. So we had over 5 million downloads globally. The company's awesome, definitely check those out. And then I co-founded a company called Udoozy before that. So we were a SaaS startup, or a SaaS startup for recruitment, for recruiting freelancers. We got a successful seed round, launched, got a decent amount of customers and paying revenue. And then I had a baby and realised startup life probably wasn't for me at that point. There's only so much you can do on kind of 2 hours sleep a night. But yeah, so that's kind of where I was at now. So I'm going to talk a little bit, like I said, about the process of getting from, you've done your customer development, you've got an inkling that there's something there. Now you want to actually get to the point where you've got a product that you can take out and start testing with people. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the concept of MVP. I know it's touched on, I think, by both so far, but what that actually means. And because if there's a few people that not entirely sure what the concept is, I don't think many people are entirely sure what the concept is. I think Eric Ries, who wrote the Lean Startup book, is still debating with people what the MVP actually stands for and what it means. So first, a little bit about what I actually do at TradeMe. I'm a UX researcher, so 50% of my time is spent doing exactly what Carl was talking about. So more of the attitudinal research, which is talking to people, trying to figure out trends in kind of their behavior, things they say, their perceptions. We have things called personas at TradeMe, which a lot of companies use, which are kind of our key segments of different types of users. So a user of TradeMe property is going to be very different from TradeMe Motors and that sort of stuff. So I'm not actually tied to one vertical. I kind of have the luxury of drifting between all of the verticals at TradeMe. So that attitudinal stuff is a lot of customer interviews, a lot of sitting down with people, a lot of trying to figure out their motivations, their needs, patterns in what they think and say about different products, and discovering their problems. So exactly what the other two have said, like discovering problems is really key. Any kind of product that you think is successful, it solves a problem in one way or another. If not, it has like unmet needs that people have discovered. Usually human behavior is exactly the same and has been for a long time. Problems get solved in different ways. The other 50% of the time is more the research I do is more around behavioral. So it's more user testing, so it's working with designers to make sure that people can actually click through and make sense of what they're seeing on the screen in front of them. You'd be surprised how many times designers kind of get stuck in that rabbit hole of designing something, they come out at the end of it, and then they put it in front of people, and you end up with kind of that on the end there of it looks like it should be simple, but people don't really know how to use it. I use a lot of GIFs and memes in my slides, I've just realized as well, and there's quite a few more, so yeah. So without UX research and without the MVP, which is TradeMe, we definitely use the MVP to our advantage as well. Without that, you kind of get this. So is everyone old enough to remember Clippy from, what a little shitbag that was. Microsoft were notoriously bad at design. They didn't do the MVP process, mostly because it kind of wasn't really talked about back then, but also they just didn't really understand people. So even if you go into Microsoft Word today, it kind of looks like the cockpit of a flight deck or something. 90% of it you're never going to use, no one's ever really going to figure out. They kind of locked themselves away and designed up this big product and then took it out to people and realized that no one uses more than half of it. And then they panicked and they made Clippy. Clippy is just there to patronize you pretty much and to make you feel even more stupid for not being able to figure it out, because a little terrible design is talking to you and trying to figure out your problem. Doesn't really work. Spoiler alert, the entire moral of my talk is actually how you don't end up with Clippy. So just leave now after that, pretty much. It's focusing around what people actually want and what they need, and that if you start with a small product and that actually just solves one problem and you do that really well and you build on that, that's how you build an MVP, that's how you build a product, and that's how you don't end up with Clippy. There's a process to it, and I'll try and demystify that as we go through. But just a little bit more about what we actually do at TradeMe and how we build products. Every product idea starts with, similar to what Carl was talking about with the lean canvas, we call it a one-pager. So we always start, our product managers, whenever they come up with a product idea or they think there's an opportunity there, we ask them to answer these questions. There's usually a few more, and it's I've kind of bastardized this slightly for startups, but because there's different challenges. Obviously, a company trade me size, we have to deal with fun things like our investors and everything else. You don't have that, which is good. So what problem are we solving? So being really explicit, being able to articulate exactly what the problem is you're solving. Stay problem focused, not solution focused. And then who experiences this problem? So what persona is that? We use it, we go explicitly into who is the exact niche group of people that are suffering from this problem, and how many of those people actually exist in market. That right there is your market size. If you are trying to solve a problem for UX researchers in New Zealand, it's going to be a really small sample size. There's a group of us, maybe 6. Probably not going to make much money off of that. Global might be a bit different. We also have, who experiences the problem, which is a big one. How are they currently solving this problem? So like I said, problems don't really change. Human behavior doesn't really change. There's new ways and new technology and new things people dream up of that can solve the same problems in different ways and address the problems that we face in everything. Facebook has so many problems with it. Someone will come up and disrupt that. Snapchat. They pretty much bought anyone that has tried to disrupt Facebook. Snapchat, I think, are the only ones left. And they're doing their best to disrupt them as well. A general good rule of thumb is if someone's using Excel for something, then hacking it together and trying to solve their problem through Excel. Exactly like wherever he's gone. So TradeGecko is probably a great example of people were probably using their stock inventory, like writing it down or using Excel. Anytime someone opens Excel to do something and they're not an accountant, there's a market there that you should probably go and disrupt. Excel is terrible. I'm probably going to bash Microsoft a lot through this. Yeah. Never going to job there. So why are we the right people to solve it? A lot of that comes down to, for TradeMe, it will be stuff like, what's our domain expertise? How does this fit in with our wider vision? How does this fit in with our line of products? Stuff like that. For startups and for you guys, it's going to be, why are you the right people to solve it? Not only domain experience, but is it something you're really passionate about? Is it something you actually care about that problem? Or is it just, I've got a good idea, I'm going to try and do this thing? Because as I think both have said, shit gets real pretty quick and it gets tough. And there's times where you do just think, oh my God, I don't want to be doing this. It's being passionate about the problem you're solving and the people you're solving it for is actually what's going to pull you through that kind of, it's called the trough of despair, I think other people have called it. And how will we know we've been successful? The other biggest one, and for us, we attach other kind of monetary values, or it could be an increase in a certain metric, or it could be, we'd stick to a model called the HEART model. I don't have it written down, I don't have all the metrics and what they are, but there's general things in there. So there's, I think it's kind of, again, we've kind of ripped off I can't remember who did it, the pirate model, pirate metrics. Google that if you haven't looked at that yet, that's pretty awesome. So we've, pirate metrics, yeah. Because they stand for R. A-A-A-R-R-R. Definitely Google those, they were definitely worth knowing. But for you guys, for startups and for people that, maybe you don't have users yet and you don't have that stuff, how you know when you've been successful is when you actually solve the problem for the user, for the person, for the target audience. That is success. That should be what you champion as success. How are you actually going to make their life better when you solve this? I honestly can't stress this one enough. The product should be aiming to make people's lives better. There's so many crappy products out there. There's so many bad products launched daily that don't really do much. Try and solve a problem for someone. Try and make them awesome at whatever they're doing. If it's B2B, try and make them really good at their job. Try and make them more productive. Try and make it, whatever it is, just simplify things for them. Make them more awesome is pretty much the goal of it. If you can kind of have that as your vision and your North Star of what you're trying to get to, that's what success should actually look like. And make it your company's vision. Moving on to kind of product, I've shifted away from TradeMe in this a little bit now and kind of talking more around the MVP process, but we still use MVPs. We still go through a similar process for this. So this is you pretty much talking about your product idea. usually just jumping to conclusions with all the things that you think that you know, and ignoring all the assumptions that are there. And even after customer development is done and you think you have a good understanding of people's problems, there's still, hundreds of ideas you can come up with to solve those problems, and you're still only really starting the kind of journey. Then it gets to the other side that Nat was talking about in her kind of, in the mum's garage process of actually finding product market fit, which is where a lot of people fall down on. Every product or business idea has an untold amount of assumptions that you're making behind it. It's just a guess, pretty much. Any business is a guess that some are more educated than others, and you can educate the guess, but it's still a guess. And you have to kind of be comfortable with that. You have to be comfortable that you're probably going to be wrong the first few times. It's some ridiculous stat that 90% or something of startups fail or don't make it past their second year. Not to bring the downer on it, but you have to be accepted, you have to kind of be comfortable with the fact that you might fail, and that's okay. You'll learn from it. You'll learn in the products that you put out, but if you can minimize what you actually put out and you minimize the risk and you don't put as much effort in as building the whole fully fledged product, then it's actually going to be easier to brush that failure off because you didn't really put too much time into it. So at TradeMe, I've been running a workshop with our product teams that are it's kind of new, and I only really kind of just came up with it. And it does involve ruthless prioritization. So everything that you think is your grand vision for, I'm going to have this product and it's going to have all these bells and whistles on it and it's going to be awesome, you're probably going to have to cut most of that out. The whole point of the lean process and the whole point of having an MVP is that you ruthlessly prioritize what's actually important and you reduce waste is kind of the main goal. So you reduce wasted effort and time and money and probably code and all the other stuff and design time. And you also don't get too heartbroken when it probably will go tits up at some point. So especially for your first crack at a product solution, trying to pick out all of the assumptions and test everything is really difficult. So we do this process that I've taken a few teams through so far, and it's been kind of handy. And you pretty much have just draw this out, sketch it out if you have to. There's 3 different types of assumptions we've kind of found and that I usually see. There's user-based assumptions. So there's things like, we're assuming that people actually want this. We're assuming that they feel this product enough, that they're looking for a solution, to kind of quote Carl back at you. Those are kind of user-based assumptions. Technical-based assumptions are things like, we can actually build this thing. The technology actually exists to automate this enough. There's a Spotify example, because there's a Spotify example for everything that I'll kind of cover on in a little bit. And that the tech is actually fast and scalable enough. That's another major thing. We've kind of found that one tricky at TradeMe at times. And there's business things as well, people are actually willing to pay enough money for you to quit your full-time job and make a salary out of this. That's a pretty big business assumption. All these things that you can kind of validate a lot of the user stuff through customer development. The other stuff is kind of hard to do unless you have an MVP or something that you're putting out in market for people to see. So what I get teams to do is we do this in cross-functional. So you have developers in there, designers, stuff like that. If it's just you, it's kind of hard to get with this. So I would definitely sense check some of this with a developer that you know, that you're friends with or something like that, that doesn't mind talking you through some of the stuff, because the tech stuff is always hard for a non-technical product manager or founder. You just don't know. So you kind of got on this side is low probability of being wrong. So probability of being wrong is a low probability of being wrong is you've done some kind of testing, you feel pretty strongly that you're actually going to be right on this. There's evidence, there's data. The way I see it is I tell product managers, if you can't go back now and bring me back evidence of what you're saying is true, then it doesn't go this side, it goes the other side. They find that hard sometimes. High probability of being wrong means you just, you don't know. It's just a guess. There's no data to support it. We have a lot of ideas, a lot of stuff, and if we say, where's the data behind that? And people go, don't know, we haven't really done anything on it yet. That's okay, but just accept that that's probably, you're going to be wrong. High impact, the other question I put up there, if we're wrong, are we fucked? Like, what can't you iterate out of? What Carl was saying, a pivot is like, if it's right up that scale, like how do you even pivot out of something like that? Something that's like if you build something and you get to that point and it's, like the user assumption I said, if people aren't willing to even use it or aren't looking for a solution or they don't feel that problem enough, that's probably going to affect things pretty bad for you. So that's a high impact risk, right? Low impact is if it's something small, like we're assuming that this name makes sense to people. Who gives a shit? Like, it's not that big of an impact to your business. Buy a new domain name. Don't launch with it though. So that's kind of the hierarchy and how we map that out. You should end up with something like this. Everyone writes down on Post-it notes, like, the problems that they're struggling or the assumptions that they believe we're making, so tech stuff like that. And you end up in the high risk zone, the danger zone. I wish we had sound effects so I could play the Top Gun music. But like anything up there, prioritize testing that because everything else hinges on that right now. You can be wrong about all this other stuff and it doesn't really matter too much. If you're wrong on any of those things, wrong on any of the assumptions you're making that are high risk, you need to know that ASAP so you can either adapt or iterate or whatever it is. This informs your MVP pretty quick. Anything that's user or business or even tech-based in there, you need to test that, and that can be your kind of first, the riskiest of assumptions for you to test. So that's kind of how you end up with, like, I called it the risky roadmap at first, and then everyone at Trophy thought that was a bad idea, so I haven't called it that since. Still kind of like it. I'm going to look at, like, kind of now having that and having done customer development, what actually is an MVP, because there's probably a few people that just don't know. I didn't know until you read the book or anything like that, which is the Lean Startup. But I'm going to contradict myself at least twice for the rest of this talk, so ask me at the end. An MVP is, like I said, really hard to actually define. Eric Ries kind of messed up in the book by saying that an MVP is a minimum viable product. There's minimum viable experiments as well. There's ways that you can test stuff without having to build a product. Some of that comes out in customer development. Some of that comes out in just hacking other stuff together that isn't your product and just seeing if it flies. To me, that isn't an MVP. There's probably like purists that will argue with me, and I'm just not here to argue that, so I don't really care. But every product idea is a guess and is a solution, and an MVP is basically just the fastest way for you to learn if that guess is right or wrong. That is what it is. So it's an experiment. It's for you to test your assumptions quickly without just blindly building your whole product and thinking that you know best. Microsoft. Chances are your first guess is going to be wrong, and that's fine. Like I said, it's much easier to accept that if you're wrong and you have spent a weekend hacking something together and testing it, that's okay. Spending 100 grand in 8 months, if you're wrong then, that's going to hurt a little bit more. I really like this because this kind of dispels the people think MVP means crappy product or cheap. I'm going to do it on the cheap, or they think it's a half-baked product. This is Spotify's version of what an MVP actually is. So if you're testing a vehicle, you don't just give someone the wheels and go, do you like this? It's like, then no, that doesn't deliver any value to them whatsoever. That doesn't make them a superhero. That doesn't tell you anything really about the end kind of problem you're trying to solve. Getting them from A to B is that value on that one. Getting them from one place to another. So you start small. You start with a skateboard and a scooter, and you build up, and eventually you've got a Tesla. Pretty sure that's how Elon Musk did it, right? And this is really cool because this kind of maps out that a lot of people think MVP is just, let's just make it functional and forget everything else, design. People hate crappy designs. If you put something in front of them and it's just, they can't even understand it really, and it looks terrible, all you're going to learn is that people hate crappy designs. And again, I can tell you that now. We could just go home. Like, you don't need to learn much more other than that. Just kind of use that, make it functional, make it reliable. If you're trying to demo something to someone and it just won't work and it's crashing, not going to have the best outcome. Make it usable. I'll talk about that in a little bit. And emotional design means put some kind of little like delighter in there. I would say that top one isn't needed straight away for an MVP, but semantics, right? Like I said, the reason why I like that is because it doesn't mean build a cheap and crappy product. And like I said, maybe that's not everyone's definition of MVP. The problem with it is that you can, and I'll show you in a sec, different types of MVPs that you can actually use to validate your product idea without actually building or coding or doing much at all. Again, contradicting myself, but you'll see. It'll make sense, I promise. These are different types of MVPs. The fake it before you make it ones are my favorite. These are like the gold standard. The Wizard of Oz MVP is who's heard of Zappos? The shoe. They're like one of the largest shoe websites in the world, like billions and billions, and they're awesome because the guy who founded Zappos is one of the most famous like MVP stories. His assumption was that people would buy shoes online. That hadn't really been tested yet. There was no there wasn't a case of people going on and Trade Me and stuff like that. It was years ago. What he did was go down to all his local shoe shops, take pictures of shoes, post them on his website, and if people ordered them, he'd run back down, buy them, and send them those shoes. Best validation ever, right? He didn't have to build any back-end system. He didn't have to talk to manufacturers. He didn't have to talk to anyone other than just going and hacking his way around it. He probably did that in a weekend, and now he's a billionaire. The Zapier hacks one, Mishguru are a local, they're a Kiwi startup, they're awesome, they do Snapchat analytics. They've got a really cool founder story, check them out, they're cool. But they, originally when they were just testing it out, they pretty much hacked together their entire backend with a product called Zapier, which is these guys. It's kind of like having, anyone technical, it's like APIs, so you could have it so that if someone emailed you, it would, if you use Trello, it will automatically make a Trello card for that, and then the Trello card being created will trigger something in a sheet or something else happening. So you can hook together an entire backend without actually coding or doing anything. Check that out, that's pretty awesome. The Concierge MVP is really similar to Zappos. So it's like Groupon were the first ones that did this. It's more you're actually open about the fact that you're doing it all manually. You're just learning, right? The most important thing is just to learn how people order and what they do and stuff like that. So their assumption with Groupon was that people wanted coupons and would use coupons. If they got it emailed to them, they'd actually go, oh, okay, that's cool. Like, I'd use this to go to whatever restaurant. That's cool. And they'll go and they'll choose that restaurant. So he manually just went around and was asking restaurants like, hey, if you give me like $10 off, I'll just email it to people, and I reckon you'll get a lot of people come in.
Very successful.
Yeah, hugely successful. Groupon, another one, and he was upfront about that. Like, said like, oh, this is what I'm doing. It's an email list pretty much. You join it, and I send you stuff, and it's awesome. It's another way of just testing. You just want to make sure that the value that you're promising you can get to, you can actually deliver on, and without actually building anything. So an MVP is like the fastest way to learn that. There's a few other examples, and I'm going to say be careful with these ones because people see these ones and then they go and try and replicate it. And you have to be real clear up front what your objective is with the MVP. What are those risky assumptions you're trying to test? So a landing page is going to test like Buffer did. So Buffer, if you don't know, they're a company that does, you can time your social media posts. They literally just started off with that landing page, nothing else, before they coded anything, and they put it out there, and it was just literally said what it does. And you can choose a time to tweet, you can add tweets to your Buffer, and Buffer does the rest. So when people, it's like if you run a business or something like that, and before the days of Buffer, you had to like manually go on and post that tweet, and then you might post 3 in an hour and then nothing for 2 days. And the people are like, oh, I didn't even see that. Buffer kind of staggers it and allows you to set, so you don't even need to go in and do it. They knew that there was value in that, so they created this landing page and put it out there. And just timed, when you clicked on that, plans and pricing, it said coming soon, but they just tracked how many people clicked plans and pricing. So that was good validation that people actually wanted the solution that they wanted to give them. Didn't validate the product as such, and this is where it kind of gets murky waters. And where I'd say don't try and copy that if the thing you're not trying to figure out is do people want it. If you're trying to figure out anything that would they actually use it, that's a different story, right? Email list is another good one that gets chucked around a lot. Product Hunt, does anyone know what Product Hunt is? So, wow, okay. Product Hunt is it's a place basically like things like Trello and all these different startups that there's hundreds and thousands of them, Zapier. It's like a daily publishing list of who's launched what. So I discover so much through Product Hunt, and companies now just launch just purely on Product Hunt and get hundreds of thousands of signups for it. Product Hunt started as Ryan Hoover, our founder, just set up an email list for his friends because he liked products and liked testing new stuff out, but there wasn't really anywhere to go to see what was coming out. So he would just email his friends once a week and be like, hey, I discovered Trello, and hey, I discovered this is awesome. And then started seeing people would pass it on to their friends, and then it grew. And then he was like, okay, shit, I could make a website out of this. They got bought by AngelList, I think it was 6 months ago, for a few $100 million, maybe. Again, an email list, if you're trying to validate a product, it worked for them, might not work for everyone. Video, the Dropbox example, is another huge one that everyone kind of jumps on. Dropbox, before they coded anything, before you had G Suite, before you could have like cloud storage, Dropbox made a video, 3 minutes long, or 250 or whatever it was, that just talked about how awesome it would be if you could have all your storage in the cloud. And they went and researched exactly what Carl was saying, customer development, talk to people, listen to the words they use to describe stuff, narrowed in on a real niche sector of people, developers pretty much, that would use this loads. And then the whole thing was littered with jokes that only developers would get, because they did their customer development. They learned the language they use, the terminology, and they made a 3-minute video and just posted it on Reddit and all the places that developers would be. And they got 70,000, let me check that right, 70,000 signups overnight, just out of nothing. Didn't cost them much. They didn't learn a line of code. They didn't test out if it was technically possible at that point. But their biggest assumption was, do people actually want this? Like, they did that, it worked, it was awesome. Took them probably a week or so, whereas it would have taken them a year to get to where they are now, or longer. You've also got crowdfunding and pre-sales. Again, murky waters. I'm wearing a Pebble watch. I loved Pebble. They were the biggest Kickstarter campaign ever. Pebble 2, I think, outdid it, and then they died. Didn't really validate that there was an actual market there. It's an awesome product. I was devastated when it did die. I kind of just wear it. It doesn't even work anymore. Like, you know, so be careful of that. It's not always the best way to validate something. It's validate demand, but not a product and not a market size. A/B testing we use a lot at TradeMe. Facebook has over 400 different versions of Facebook at any given time. There's 400 different versions of Facebook at any given time because they're. So if you land on it now, funny enough, read a book called Chaos Monkeys. Chaos Monkeys, Adventures Through Silicon Valley. A few people are nodding. It's about a guy who has a startup and then he gets bought and he goes and works for Facebook, and it's an ad tech thing. And he was saying that, it's an American guy, it says in the book, that Facebook tested stuff in New Zealand for ages, because it was a small country in the middle of nowhere that if they messed stuff up, no one would really care. No one in America or anyone outside of New Zealand would know about it. But we're an English-speaking country, we're very similar to the States and to Europe and stuff, so they could kind of validate and test their ideas and test their MVPs here. And if we woke up and were like, oh, this new Facebook shit, no one in the States is gonna know about it, honestly. And he says that in the book, it's great. But what I mean with A/B testing is like, I might land on it and see one thing, and you might land on it and see another thing, and whoever gets the highest click-through rate, or whatever it is that they're trying to do, that one wins, whatever their metric is that they're testing. If that wins, they roll that out to everyone. And they do this, it could be 400 different things a day at any given time. Amazon are notorious for A/B testing. Apparently every 30 seconds, Amazon ship code. Every 30 seconds of the day, Amazon will put something new or iterate or test something, or insane. TradeMe doesn't have those kind of numbers yet, but cool. I don't know how much time I've got, but I just want to talk about as well, like how you should actually make it usable. So you've done your customer development. You kind of understand that customers, there's a problem exists. You've kind of set the vision as the, I want to solve this problem, and you've been ruthless about prioritizing which are your riskiest assumptions to test. So you kind of should have an idea which MVP might work for whatever it is that you're doing. Again, it's tough. It's no silver bullet, right? But at least then, when you start to kind of want to get to a product, you can start doing user testing. And user testing, you don't need to be a designer. So you could literally, there's a free app called Marvel, which is awesome, which I use it a lot just for hacking stuff together. And you could literally sketch out on a bit of paper your sign-in button, and then it links to this screen, and it might be, you want to draw a picture here and put some copy there, and then a button at the bottom, and then you can take pictures of it on your phone using the app, and then start making hotspots and kind of link it together. So you don't need to code, you don't need to design much. If you can draw rectangles and write, then you can make a wireframe, you can make a prototype, you can take that out and say to people, don't bias them with it, but ask questions like, I want you to get from this screen to our contact details, and see if they can navigate through it. It's really crude, it's not gonna tell you too much in terms of validation, but you'll find pretty quickly if people are like, I have no idea what you're talking about. So many people get to like I said, like at TradeMe, at every company I've ever seen, usually the whole reason for my role and for the UX researcher role is because designers get to a phase where they're like, you just design this thing, and they put it in front of people, and it's like, oh shit, no one can actually use it. Like, it just happens. It's like you go down the designer rabbit hole, and you can do the same as an entrepreneur of just being so like laser. Of course people want this. Of course people want. I'd use it. And you go down, and then you release something. No one wants it, and no one uses it, and then you're kind of left scratching your head at why. If you can prototype and you can test quickly, like I'm talking weekly, test everything. Just get it out in front of people, test it, start building up. You should start to be able to get to kind of wireframes and a general flow of what your product or app or website, or whatever it is, whatever the MVP turns out to be that's best for you, you can get to something that's actually usable as well as going to validate those assumptions. You can spend ages on working on MVP and no one even gets to the value because they can't sign in or they can't work out what your login page looks like because people just don't understand it. And it also, this is my favorite GIF of all time because it sums up what user testing is actually like. This is you watching people trying to work out how to use your sign-in page or your product. If you don't do any user testing and you wait too long before you get it in front of people, this is what will happen. It's just horrendous. I could watch this on loop because it's so frustrating. So just to recap, I was going to leave it on there for another couple of minutes, but I've done it. Quick recap, don't be Microsoft. Instead, focus on the outcome that you actually want to provide. So not your first solution attempt. Where people go wrong is they focus on their solution. Everyone wants to be that entrepreneur that's the knight in shining armor, right? That rides in with, my solution's gonna save everyone and gonna solve all these problems for people. And they obsess over their solution, not the problem. If you obsess over the problem, if your first attempt is wrong, which it probably will be, because everyone's is, if your first attempt is wrong, you're not going to get too hung up about it. You're going to recognize it and go, oh, okay, shit, what's the next thing? Like, how else do I solve this problem? You obsess over the problem and the outcome and turning your potential users into superheroes. Define what the riskiest assumptions that you need to validate are. Every business, we still obsess over what are TradeMe's riskiest assumptions at the minute. We're assuming that people will still want to use us as Amazon launches, right? We're seriously obsessing over how do we validate that? How do we keep testing that? How do we stay relevant? Choose the right MVP type and get it to early customers as quickly as possible. So do your customer development. Define who your people are that you're solving this problem for. Who feels that pain the most? There's people that will probably have the problem but not really care. There's people that will have that problem and be like craving a solution for it, right? Like Carl's managed to find. And get an MVP or something in front of them early so that you can actually start refining it and start testing it and start seeing if your idea is right of the solution that you're putting forward. Iterate on your designs through rapid prototyping and user testing. Like, don't wait. Don't think that you can design a good sign-up flow. That's why UX designers and product designers are paid a lot of money, because they don't just think they know it all. A lot of designers that were like print designers, where you can't iterate on it, and print was print, right? When they became digital designers and visual, like UI and UX designers, couldn't really understand the concept of, oh, I can go back and change this. Like, you can't go back and change a magazine, but when it came to doing screens, it's like, if you get it in front of people and you test it real early on, you can change it, doesn't matter. Reduce development waste and accelerate learning. So many, especially developers, is there any kind of technical people in the room? Like to build, which is cool. Like, get it in front of people though. Reduce the waste. Don't spend like 2-3 nights pulling all-nighters with cans of Red Bull and then coming out with it with code that no one's ever going to see, because it sucks. Get it in front of people. And yeah, that's pretty much it. That's some of our process and some of my process, bastardized together in one slide of memes.
Cool, that was awesome.
Might just unplug it.
Cool.
Cool.
Thank you. That was so good. I wish we had time for questions, but unfortunately we don't. But
Sorry,
thank you
I
so.
spoke
No.
so
We started late, and
Right, cool.
we all spoke too long. But there was so much good information, I couldn't tell you to stop. That was really great. I'm just really quickly going to run through the last part, which is on business model. It'll be really fast. If anyone needs to leave, you can. I won't feel bad. I won't feel like I'm doing a bad presentation, although hopefully that's not the case. One moment. Oh, wait. I need this. Is that working? Cool. One, just to add to Greig's presentation, what he mentioned about minimal viable product and the meaning. There's another really cool definition that I like called the minimal lovable product. The Happy Startup School talk about that as a concept, and it's just something that's good enough that make people like you enough that they'll continue to engage while you build the actual product, which is what I think is cool. Sorry, clicker. Yeek. Where are we going? So I'm just really quickly going to touch on value creation and business model really fast, because I think it's really important. And the reason is that the product is really sort of just the beginning, or the minimal viable product. And so I know that for me, you feel like you've created a product, and it's sort of what Greig talked about is like, or they talk about the concept of like you build a product and expect people to turn up, and it never really works like that. So ideally, you want to be working on building your customers and getting a following and creating a brand and telling a story before, and getting users to start validating your product before you've launched it. So then you've sort of, you're doing the validation piece and you've got a bit of momentum. But for most people, that's really hard to do, especially if you're a solo founder or there's just two of you. There is just so much to do. And then even when you launch the product, you feel like things are just going to work and then everyone's going to come and buy your product, but that's generally never the case. There is still a lot to do to get to the point where you've got a viable business, and that's where focusing on the business model is really important. So it is really, I guess, with the concept of startup and I guess the sort of the focus of startup tends to be a lot on product, and that's obviously important because you need to build a product that solves a real problem as well. But it's also really important to build a business model, so you need to have people paying for your product, and you need to focus on creating something that's sustainable. And for me, I feel like that's where the grind really kicks in, because when you're getting to the point of building a product, there's kind of like this excitement because you're creating something new, and obviously it depends on your personality type. But then when you get to the point that you've got the product, there are so many other components that you need to piece together to make work. And this is where I find people really start to feel it. And I think this quote sums it up well. I've used a lot of quotes, but people knew how hard I worked to get all my mastery. It wouldn't seem wonderful at all, by Michelangelo. And this is sort of a good way of explaining working out what your business model is. So that's what I think anyway. And so so I guess you can consider product as one part of the business model, and You have to build something that people perceive to have more value than what they're paying for it. That's how you create a product, and that value that they pay for it has to exceed the value that goes into the business to create it. So that's sort of what a sustainable business model is. So you need to create something that makes people perceive your product to be valuable, and that's what marketing and sales and that customer experience piece, that's why that's really important. I kind of skipped over this slide, which explains it in better detail, but it's kind of quite technical and requires a bit of time. But there's a lot that you need to do in a business to create the value that goes beyond the price, and that, because if people don't perceive your product to have more value than what it costs, they're not going to buy it. And that's sort of what I feel like, that's sort of the underlying concept of your business model. So the first stage of it is awareness. So people need to figure out who you are, and awareness or acquisition. So they need to become part of your world, and that may be signing up to what you're doing, following you on Facebook, coming along to an event or something like that. And that can be really hard to do as well. So you've got to figure out your marketing strategy and how you get in front of people and how you create something that's really compelling. And a lot of work that you do around that is also figured out through validation as well, because you're defining who your target market is and what they really care about. So doing the awareness or acquisition piece, is doing validation to figure that out, is really, really important as well. The second stage in your business model is giving your customers enough value so that they'll give they'll want to engage with you, or they're prepared to give you money for your product or service. So this is where you get things like content or events, for example. So you would have, for Mum's Garage as an example, you would have found out about Mum's Garage, maybe you followed us on Facebook or Instagram, and then you're coming along to these events, and those are like an additional value add piece. And people do that through all different ways, like video content, maybe they do a one-on-one meeting, or you get a one-on-one consultation. So that's bringing people sort of closer into your reality. The third stage of the business model is the sale, and that's always really hard for most people. So that's working out how you convince someone who's interested in what you're doing and wants to be part of reality, how you knock off their concerns so that they actually feel comfortable buying your product. Then there's the product delivery. So then how do you engage with your customers when they're using your product so that they add value? So this is all working on the perceived value, because perceived value is really what creates value for your business, because you have real value, which is like the actual tangible cost of it, and then you have perceived value, and the value you create for your business is the difference. Then you need to do the work to keep your customers happy and hopefully get them to tell everyone about you. So within each of these little components, there are a significant number of tasks that you have to do to get these right. And this is the stuff that's not as exciting as what you see from the outside. It's like doing the hard work to make all the components of things work well. And I wanted to touch on this because just based on conversations that I've had, there's a number of people that are sort of at this stage, and you really feel the grind. But so it's just, when you get to this stage, it's almost like you're almost there. You just need to keep working on tweaking each of these components to get that model that works. And when you get that model that works, that's when you're starting to make money, because you're not recreating everything. You've got a sustainable model that you can start generating profit. So if there's anyone at this stage, keep going. So it's sort of, I don't know if you've heard about the compound effect, but this is really also what it's about when you're at the stage of building, any stage in the business really, but when you're building a product and the business model, but it's just keeping on doing those small incremental gains that build up over a period of time to significantly improve what you're creating in the long term. And that means at an individual level as well, it's working on all those little tiny skills that feel so incredibly hard and so frustrating, you feel like you're not really getting anywhere. It's consistently doing those things so that you're constantly creating a little bit of value, a little bit of value, a little bit of value. You're constantly developing yourself as a person a little bit at a time, a little bit at a time, and a little bit at a time. So then eventually, after 2 years, you look back and you've looked back at what you were at that point, and you can't believe other people won't be able to believe what you've become, because it's just these ongoing things. And that's really what I find, I guess sort of when I started Mum's Garage, what I found is that people would glorify these entrepreneurs who look like extraordinary people because they have all these amazing capabilities. But then you talk to them about what they were like at the early stage, or even just watching people develop. Everyone just starts out similar to anyone else who's at the journey. It's just that those who become successful continuously do those little things so that they build a product that people want, they build a model that works, and they develop themselves into someone who can lead a company. So I know we have covered a lot, and if you're just at the beginning, it may seem overwhelming, but you quickly learn it. It's just important to make that start and keep on keeping on along the journey until you get there. And I love this quote so much. Before I started Mum's Garage, I was in corporate, and so comparing what it's like working with startups and building your own company, comparing that to corporate, I think this quote sums it up. Paul Graham is the founder of Y Combinator, which is they created the accelerator model. They're the best accelerator in the world, and it says, running a startup is like being punched in the face repetitively, but working for a large company is like being waterboarded. And I think that really defines it, because you have all these ups and downs, all these hard things that you got to struggle with, but you get those moments in between where you're just creating something that's valuable, when you're creating something that really aligns with what you're doing, versus working for a company. I guess the feeling of working for a company that doesn't align with what you want to create is you've constantly got this feeling of knowing that you should be doing something better, but you're just sticking at it because you haven't learned how to do the next stage, or you haven't committed to taking or getting the support that you need to take the next step. So it's a tough journey, and people talk about it. We've all talked about how hard it is, but it is really, really worth it. And I think it's fundamentally important to start learning the skills behind entrepreneurship now, because the world is changing so fast, and jobs are becoming significantly more automated, and that's a trend that's just going to increase incredibly rapidly. So knowing how to create value and knowing your own value is just a fundamental skill that you should have to actually de-risk your future. So I encourage you to connect with Greig, Carl. We run a number of programs and events through Mum's Garage as well, and just make a start, because life's too short to do the things you don't enjoy. Cheesy, but it really is.
Great.
Cool. Thank you so much, and thank you to our two speakers. It was great.